Every creature and boss in Resident Evil 4 Remake explored. Hi, this is Simon and welcome to another Marvelous Videos. Remake of Resident Evil 4 is out. It appears to be quite accurate to the original in terms of the narrative. In regards to graphical detail, though, obviously the difference is a lot. Fans may find it tough to detach their memories when experiencing the remake, especially since the original Resident Evil 4 profoundly impacted gamers worldwide. The one key component contributing to the game's legendary status was the diversity of monsters and bad guys. A few things may have changed in the remake's current way of doing things, but it will be particularly fascinating to learn which Resident Evil 4 adversary types have returned to frighten us and what their backstory is. So without further ado, let's take a deep look at every creature and boss from the original Resident Evil 4 that could make their comeback. Before we go into our explanation, we do have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. And let's begin.
Sadler!
Osmund Sadler. We had to begin with the intriguing and cryptic cult leader named Osmund Sadler. Sadler was a bioweapons research chief who had used his abilities to establish a large cult and paramilitary organization called Los Illuminados to conquer the planet. He exploited Las Plagas, a parasitic entity, to regenerate a new wave of monsters called Ganados that Resident Evil fans had never witnessed before. He intended to abduct the president's daughter, Ashley Graham, inject the parasite into her, then proceed to the United States to contaminate the president, allowing Sadler to commence his global invasion. Despite their metamorphosis into a multi-legged monster of ferocious power, the protagonist, Leon Kennedy, eventually thwarted Sadler's plans. Sadler could psychologically manipulate anyone afflicted with the Las Plagas parasite owing to the master plaga in his system. Sadler's mutant form could unleash extremely destructive blows and is sufficiently powerful to lift up and toss steel girders. He also had completely impenetrable skin, although the eyes on his body were vulnerable spots. He served as the final boss in the fight of Resident Evil 4's primary campaign at the conclusion of the last chapter at the Steel Tower.
Son of a bitch!
Verdugos. Verdugos were a pair of dangerous assassins that were created due to the Plagas experiment by Los Illuminados through merging the Plaga specimen with human and insect DNA. They hunted and chased a player at breakneck speeds while acting as Ramon Salazar's protectors. They are one of the most scary creatures you'll encounter in the original game. Their skinny, scorpion-like shapes are distinctive, but their transformed bodies are hidden behind enormous Los Illuminados cloaks, one in black and the other in red. Salazar called them his left and right hands respectively. As Leon avoided a booby trap at Salazar Castle, Ramon Salazar ordered his red-cloaked Verdugo to assassinate the invader, leading to a boss fight in the sewers. He serves as one of the few bosses that Leon does not have to beat in the game in order to progress. The black-cloaked Verdugo stayed at Salazar's side, later merging with its master and Queen Plaga to confront Leon. Unlike most creatures infested with Las Plagas, Verdugos have human-level intelligence and predatory instincts. Verdugo's inherent armor-like exoskeleton deflects bullets of all calibers. Nitrogen only momentarily weakens them, otherwise killing them is very tough. Firearms, shells and rockets are effortlessly averted and deflected by them. They move at a ridiculous speed and can easily smash through giant metal doors. Their claws are vicious enough to slice human flesh, and their tails have a blade-like structure that digs through steel and concrete, allowing Verdugos to hunt without exposing any fragile parts. They also use them to climb ceilings and walls, so watch your head. Regeneradors. Regeneradors are one of the scariest looking creatures in Resident Evil 4. They aren't that tough to beat, but they can pose a daunting task with accurate shooting in only certain weak spots. Otherwise, they will regrow limbs and tissues indefinitely. Now you know from where they get their name. The Regeneradors were created by implanting several parasites into a human body, prompting the body to mutate dramatically as a consequence of Los Illuminados experimentation on Plaga-based bioweapons. They are big, somewhat human-shaped monsters with hairless, supposedly rough grey skin. Their lips are enormous, encompassing the bulk of their otherwise dull faces, and are lined with needle-like fangs that compel the Regenerador to grin in a very creepy way. Regeneradors remain in position and emit distinct hefty breaths before detecting the player, making it simple to know whether they are around. They are not very fast and typically approach the player by strolling. While they move with a peculiar, unsettling, gnarled stride, Regeneradors are susceptible to startling bursts of speed while striking, brutally slicing and biting, and expanding their limbs to extraordinary lengths to capture their victim. While exploring the environment, a Regenerador may rush towards the player randomly and knock him down with their strong arms, which can be pretty unsettling to the player since it happens at unexpected moments. Chainsaw Man. In the opening chapter of Resident Evil 4, players are pretty much up against normal Ganados. They're sluggish, they groan, and if you strike them precisely, their skulls explode. This is all typical zombie fare until the Ganados begin to come in massive numbers, and then you hear a chainsaw. That's the sound of Dr. Salvador, famously or infamously known as the Chainsaw Man, and his little friend, a dangerous chainsaw. This chainsaw-wielding maniac will rush at Leon and decapitate his head in one blow if he manages to connect properly. For the most prolonged period, the only survival strategy was to avoid being caught before the gamers worldwide started coming up with their tactics and ideas. He's a big chainsaw-wielding villager who wears a burlap sack over his head and conventional farming attire. As a result of the Plaga parasite, the Chainsaw Man has grown increasingly vicious, and he is compelled to stalk his victims with his signature chainsaw. He has also been rendered extraordinarily robust in contrast to typical villagers due to the Plaga's integration and can easily absorb small weapons fire. Since he is more durable than other foes, it's easier for him to bridge the distance between himself and Leon and expose his chainsaw to Leon's throat. Dr. Salvador is a noob's landmine that haunts them for the remainder of the game. Krauser. Jack Krauser is a national military officer turned lackey for Albert Wesker and one of the Resident Evil 4 supporting villains. He was Leon Kennedy's previous USACOM comrade. After retiring, Krauser became embroiled in the Albert Wesker's activities and worked with the Los Illuminados sect as part of his invasion. He was the one who abducted the president's daughter, Ashley Graham, and took her to the cult leader, Osmund Sadler, to earn his trust. In Resident Evil 4, you encounter this ex-SOCOM twice. The first is a spectacular knife duel in which your life relies on rapidly tapping the appropriate buttons of your controller. The second provides a more conventional but equally different boss battle with a mutant Krauser with a sparkling new blade arm. Krauser was fascinated by the Plaga's ability and deliberately absorbed one into his own body, allowing him to change his left arm into a gigantic blade-like appendage. Krauser was a professional knife-wielding soldier with an intense combat style and the aptitude to handle a range of firearms. Even when he wasn't mutated, he could do remarkable things like backflip off ledges and jump over 6 feet in height. Krauser's skills get enhanced to superhuman degrees after transforming, permitting him to utilize his mutant arm as a defense and weapon. The character grew so famous that the creators reintroduced him in the Dark Side Chronicles, where we finally learned more about his rogue soldier's backstory. Ramon Salazar. Ramon Salazar, a Castellan, was a high-ranking member of Osmund Sadler's Los Illuminados cult and is widely regarded by Resident Evil aficionados as the actual facilitator of the Plaga infestation that prompted the tragic events of Resident Evil 4. After all, Sadler unearthed the Plaga's long-dormant fossils in Salazar's ancestral fortress. He was just 20 years old, despite his petite frame resembling that of an 8-year-old kid and his greying hair and wrinkly face giving him the look of an older man. As we know, he had 2 Verdugos as his bodyguards. After rescuing Ashley, Leon ended up in Salazar's castle while they were trying to escape. To hinder Leon's progress, the Castellans set up several booby traps, beasts and Ganado soldiers all around the fortress. Salazar was also able to hijack the communication line and mock Leon, while he and Ashley made their way through the castle. Despite his constant failures to assassinate the US spy, Salazar effectively recaptured Ashley. Salazar eventually deployed deployed one of his Verdugo bodyguards to deal with the American operative, but it had zero impact. After surviving the Verdugo, Leon followed Salazar into a tower that housed the Queen Plaga. The agent proceeded to the top and faced Salazar one final time, who made an attempt to thwart his mission by integrating with the Queen Plaga's body alongside his black-hooded Verdugo bodyguard. Leon kills him in the end and escapes the exploding island. Salazar utilized his tentacles that erupted from his arms to implant Las Plagas within individuals and manipulate those with parasites already inside them. He didn't appear to have any remarkable combat abilities on his own, but when he merged with the Queen Plaga, he acquired gigantic tentacles to strike with and a mutant Verdugo head on a long neck.
God, I thank you for your gift.
Bitores Mendes. We are aware that Osmund Sadler was the head of the Los Illuminados cult, but Bitores Mendes is the individual who provided Sadler a head start. Mendes once served as a lowly priest of the Catholic Church, but he traded his humanity and beliefs to the parasitic Las Plagas, who converted him into an indestructible monster. Mendes preserves all of his intellect and cognitive abilities, which is terrifying compared to most of the series' huge antagonists. Mendes was originally the chief of the village Valdilobos and a former Christian priest, having been one of the bearers of the dominant species Plaga and ultimately becoming a preacher representing Los Illuminados to his villagers. When Leon first met Chief Mendes in the game, he had no way of subduing the old man's immense stature and was rendered unconscious. Later, Mendes intended to strangle Leon, but had a change of heart after knowing that Leon had become a carrier of a Las Plagas parasite. In his final battle with Leon, he was engulfed in an explosion and appeared dead. The blast, however, led Mendes to change into a horrific, monstrous creature. His fingernails expanded into elongated, pointed talons. A couple of divided limbs protruded from his back. His chest was separated by a broad, vertebral, column-like structure surrounded by tiny, active legs, significantly increasing his already astounding height. In the end, though, Leon managed to overpower him after a challenging boss fight. Mendes' objectives and demeanor may be simple, but his massive stature and horrific metamorphosis make a sufficient impact on gamers. Colmillos. Canine adversaries are frequently swift and savage in gaming. Colmillos in Resident Evil 4 is no exception, possessing scary grins, tiny eyes, and Plagas appendages sprouting from their backs. They are basically Plaga-infected wolves. Colmillos initially appeared after Leon defeats Del Lago and attempts to traverse the lake again. 4 of these deadly creatures greet him on the other side of the river. Later, close to the cathedral, Leon comes across another group of the 3 Colmillos, a challenge he must face to continue. These beasts are far more common in Ramon Salazar's Labyrinth Garden, where Salazar nurtures about a dozen of these creatures as pets. Players are frequently taken aback by their ambush tactics while navigating the maze. Dogs, being inherent social creatures, are considered to acclimatize to parasitism substantially more quickly than humans. Colmillos usually target in bunches, with one reaching for your throat and another flanking you. Due to the infection, their teeth have expanded or been supplanted with more giant teeth. The new jaws are so massive they cannot shut their mouths. Colmillos may be detected at night time by their highly reflective tissue that wraps around their eyes and shines green in low light circumstances. Colmillos' spines have mutated as a consequence of the parasite's proliferation in the abdomen. If a Colmillos is challenged, the Plaga is capable of causing considerable harm by ripping apart the skin so that its sharpened tentacles may be utilized as a weapon. There is bad news regarding the remake because it changed the atmosphere in some regions, so players might not even know when to expect a pack of Colmillos charging at them. Garradors. The Garradors were initially human hosts with their physical abilities amplified by the Plaga. Though they successfully gained extraordinary physical powers, the Garrador also grew recklessly violent, destroying everything that caught their attention. As a result, their captors had to sew their eyes closed to confine them to cages. Their blindness strengthened their remaining senses, notably their hearing, rendering them effective competitors even while blind. Two kinds of Ganadors appear in the game, one armored, the other not. Leon encounters them a few times. The Garrador possess razor-sharp talons on both arms that they utilize to tremendous effectiveness in battle. They use their keen sense of hearing to pinpoint and stalk their victim before executing a violent attack with their devastating claws. The Garrador has serious shortcomings. One is its vision deficit, and the other is its conspicuously exposed Plaga exploding from its spinal column. So when the player shoots at the bare Plaga on their back, the damage they receive is substantially amplified. Nonetheless, Garradors are highly dangerous, and if found in the line of one of their tirades, they may kill a player in a matter of seconds. Del Lago. Del Lago was a giant plague-infected amphibian that dwelt in Valle do Lobos Lake. Del Lago was one of the Los Iluminados' earliest plague experiments. They used a salamander as a carrier for the parasite. The creature mutated in response to its diminutive host, specifically increasing its size. The amphibian was confined in the village lake since the sect failed to regulate its conduct using the Plaga, which had been experiment's initial goal. Del Lago is Resident Evil 4's first boss fight, and one with the most distinctive in the franchise, owing to how it's fought with harpoons rather than guns. The Del Lago got entangled in the boat's anchor when Leon was traversing the lake on a tiny speedboat. Leon was then propelled at breakneck speed behind the Del Lago. The Del Lago began gushing blood in enormous amounts after being shot with over 10 harpoons, and it succumbed to its wounds, sinking to the depths of the lake, nearly taking Leon with it. The creature was more than 20 meters long and possessed an enormous mouth and multiple rows of teeth. It had no apparent pair of eyes, yet its quickness in water was deceitful. As it moved in attack pattern, innumerable squirming Plaga tentacles erupted from its throat. It was a genuine sea monster that could swallow any human in the blink of an eye. Ganados. Ganados were just ordinary people who had been contaminated with the Plaga parasite, which allowed Sadler to govern them. Even though they reacted to pain, killing them requires far more effort than killing ordinary humans. They are the main thugs that you have to fight in the game. They can converse and interact among themselves, and they've got considerable cognition. They can grasp you or use tools, most commonly a pitchfork, hatchet or a pickaxe, to assault you. Some utilize explosives, which you may take full advantage of by having them blast themselves or even other Ganados up. These Ganados are usually located in the castle's village area and mining regions. Apart from their red glowing eyes, they seem wholly human and continue to live their daily lives in their little hamlet as usual. The bodies of Ganados grow more robust due to the parasitization, and their pain tolerances rise as well. These advancements enable hosts to effortlessly carry other individuals to survive gunfire without reacting. Nevertheless, if a Ganado suffers too much injury, the Plaga may cause substantial bodily harm by ripping apart their throat in order to actively protect itself from assailants. Certain Ganados are believed to get stronger and last longer than their counterparts. There were three subsections of Ganados: the combatants, the villagers, and the cultists or monks. Each had different skill sets and functions. The word Ganados in Spanish means cattle or livestock. That explains a lot. Cowhead Ganado. Next on our list is the first new villain that is introduced in the Resident Evil 4 remake. Resident Evil 4 wasn't short on strange and unique villains and creatures, and many of us have a soft place for the Ganados as they're so distinct from conventional zombies. Capcom, on the other hand, looks to be preparing a greater evil for the remake, with a Game Informer teaser revealing what seems to be another extremely enormous Ganado, clutching an absurdly oversized hammer and donning a cow's head. That's correct, a decapitated cow's head, not a cow mask. We don't really know much about this character, but it is likely a mini-boss compared to Resident Evil 5's executioner, Majini. Art director Hirofumi Nakayoda added in an Associated interviewed that animals' heads, such as deers, have previously been employed as set props in the Resident Evil franchise, so the inclusion kind of makes sense. According to fans, this addition could put the Resident Evil 4 remake environment closer towards the profound south aesthetics of Resident Evil 7, Biohazard, and bridge the two ends of the saga together.
That was yours.
Chainsaw Sisters. The Chainsaw Sisters belong to the Chainsaw Granado subclass. They donned bandages that entirely covered their heads and brandished crimson chainsaws. Fortunately, like a chainsaw man, they move slower than the player character. One of the sisters challenged Ada Wong about her attempt to gain admission to the church. A second sister approached her from the other side of the valley towards the caverns. Two more sisters joined a camp where they assaulted Leon, and Leon, on the other hand, managed to execute both of them. Like the Chainsaw Men, the Chainsaw Sisters have extremely high health and a strike that may kill the player in one blow. They swing their chainsaws considerably quicker than their male counterparts, making them much more hazardous. Plaga. This list would have made no sense if we omitted the central antagonistic force of Resident Evil 4. Las Plagas was a newly introduced parasite that was responsible for the game's grotesque transformations. Osmund Sadler produced the Las Plagas parasites using pre-existing samples gathered from his ancestors in hopes of infecting humans and generating monsters. These massive cricket-like insects function in a hive mentality and are some of the game's most deadly foes. As the parasites evolved, Sadler and his team were able to develop more and more horrific monsters. Unlike the T-virus from the previous installment, which is transmitted by airborne contaminants or bites from infected persons, people are injected with an egg from which the Las Plagas develop and proceed to take over their host. Sadler and his associates referred these infected individuals as the Ganados, and they behave in a hive mind style, obeying instructions from only Sadler or his deputies. Even as among the Resident Evil franchise most proficient heroes, Leon finds himself in jeopardy when confronted with swarms of Ganados. A Plaga can regulate its host's conduct by attaching itself to the central nervous system. Plaga infection involves internal bleeding in large blood vessels around the eyes, dizziness, coughing up blood, and hallucinations in the human host. They are susceptible to UV radiation and hence avoid being exposed to it. Armadura. Armaduras were the knights in not-so-shining armor of Resident Evil 4. They were the Plaga-infested suits of armor that inhabited Salazar's castle's darkest passages. There were two types of them, one in lighter-colored silver armor with a round headgear, which contained Type A Plaga and wielded a broadsword, and one in grittier black and gold armor with a square helmet, which usually contained a Type B Plaga, which was extremely dangerous as they were more robust. When a Plaga withdrew from its host, it could only live for a short time. As a result, they hid inside the medieval suits of armor, which were everywhere in the castle, to shelter themselves while preserving their energy in latent condition to survive. These Plagas could fight by stretching themselves to cover all four of the suit's limbs. They used medieval weapons like swords and axes to strike. They initially appeared when Ashley Graham was exploring Salazar's castle's murky corridors on her own. They later reappeared when Leon tried to get the King's Grail when he was attacked by 6 Armaduras. Novistadors were created due to the heinous Los Illuminados experiment with Plaga parasite, which fused human DNA with those of several species of insects. They possessed 2 pairs of sparkling eyes, 2 antennas, and 2 pairs of wings. Their front legs were armed with 3 lengthy claws, which were sharp enough to puncture human skin. The other major weapon accessible to Novistadors were extremely corrosive acid. This acid could rapidly erode human flesh away. At Salazar Castle, Leon faced 2 types of Novistador, one in the sewer and another in the castle towers. The former could camouflage themselves while the latter could fly. Choose your pick. El Gigante. El Gigante referred to a class of human-based bioorganic weapons compiled by the Los Illuminados as a result of their Plagas experiment. They were 4 times larger than the ordinary people and possessed immense power and stamina. They were brilliant as bioweapons, were challenging to control and dangerous to the Ganados. As a solution, Los Illuminados only manufactured a number of El Gigantes and circulated them across the region. 2 were appointed to defend the Salazar castle in the subterranean zones. The other 2 were transferred to the village and placed in the mining areas that were Ganados no longer required. After US agent Leon Kennedy was deemed too powerful for the regular Ganados, these giants were freed from confinement to eliminate the protagonist. In the original game, there were 4 El Gigante bosses to confront, one of which was optional, making the 3 compulsory. El Gigante's skin was durable and could withstand a great deal of punishment. The troll-like monster crushed its foes with its huge feet, but it also swept up items like trees and rocks quickly to use as projectiles. They were portrayed as almost savage beasts, attacking anybody moving, including fellow Plaga bearers. Iron Maiden. The Iron Maidens were also a type of human bioweapons produced due to the Los Illuminados Plaga experiment. They descended from older Regenerador species. The difference between them and regular Regeneradors was that they always had a parasite on their back and spikes emerging from their bodies. The Iron Maidens lack possibly Regeneradors' fiercest assault, the shoulder bite, since they didn't use their jaw much. Instead, they'll grab and squeeze you in a death bear hug, puncturing Leon on their spikes. This move will nearly always kill you, especially on professional difficulty. The purpose of Iron Maidens were similar to that of the Regeneradors, were met less frequently. Leon only stumbles across 3 of them in the whole game.
Leon?
Just stay close.
Cultists. I always mention cultists when talking about the Ganados and their different types. However, I need to mention them again because we should look into this subspecies more closely, as they are most important type of Granados and they do appear in the remake. They were a spiritual society centered at Salazar Castle that followed the doctrines of Los Illuminados. Ramon Salazar established this spiritual society around the turn of the millennium to impose Los Illuminados among his Catholic staff. These men were, they're injected with Plaga eggs during a baptism ceremony to bring them into the cult, making them highly sensitive to persuasion and ultimately becoming Salazar's servants, whom he despised as inferior beings. Like other Ganado followers, the monks would shift between executing everyday work, performing rituals, and engaging in combat against intruders. They are incredibly pale-skinned since they haven't left the castle in years and are completely hairless. It is believed that they shaved off all their hair themselves as a religious statement rather than as a result of the infection. Gatling Man. The Gatling Man was a type of Ganado soldier that served in Osmund Sadler's Ganado force. He was strong enough to walk around with a Gatling gun and possessed a red beret. He also wore a patch over his right eye. He possessed heightened endurance and resistance to weapons due to the Plaga parasite's effect. As a result, he could even survive taking headshots from a rifle. When enraged, they could become exceedingly destructive with their weapon, mowing down anything in sight, including the player, scenery items, and even other Ganados. Leon encounters them multiple times, and taking the behemoths down each time is a thrill. Marvelous verdict. That brings us to the end of this video. There are plenty of enemies and monsters in Resident Evil 4, and it will be fascinating to find out which of them are revisited in the remake. Some of them will probably not appear, especially if there is any mismatch in the tones or if they make any specific changes to the style of the narrative. Nevertheless, depending on how much is altered and the advancement of graphics in the video games, fans may find many villains in the remake to be scarier than the original. Which adversary from the original game are you most excited to face again? Let us know in the comments below. And if you like this video, click the like button and share it with all your gamer friends. We'll see you soon.